Well, we have Rick here with us today. I don't know if you remember, but we had someone from Sonic. Was it Matt Mayo?
Yeah, Mayo, yeah.
And he mentioned Rick, and I was able to contact him and get him here, so I'm excited to hear him. Rick was born and raised in Lebanon County, second of 6 children. He graduated from Eastern Lebanon County High School in 1972 and promised himself that he would never go to school again. 10 years later, Rick and his wife Josie packed up and moved to Lynchburg, Virginia, where Rick attended Liberty University. So apparently you changed your mind.
I did.
Okay. Earning a bachelor's degree in psychology and had 2 children, a son Peyton and a daughter Stephanie. After graduation, he and his family moved back to PA, where Rick began working in the mental health field, serving as house manager for group homes for intellectually disabled. He then began working for Phil Haven Hospital, where he worked on a secure adult psychiatric unit. After several years, Rick went back to school. Look at that.
I know.
You listening? Keep going back to school even if you think you're never going to go. He went back to school and became an RN. After working as a psychiatric nurse and acute care nurse, he soon found his place in long-term care and in particular, working with those diagnosed with dementia. He began working at Masonic Village in 2002 as nurse manager of the Memory Support Neighborhoods. He focused on developing their dementia program, developed a training program, and provided oversight and care for the staff, and especially the residents who resided there. After 20 years, Rick retired for 4 days and then came back to work full-time as Assistant Director of Nursing. He authored 2 books, Dementia, the Experience, a Family and Caregiver Resource, and Dementia, Behaviors and the Stigma, the Positive Approach to Care. Then, as a sideline, he also authored an inspirational novel entitled David and Leah, When Hearts Listen. So welcome, Rick.
Thank you.
I love that you retired for 4 days.
I know. It didn't last long.
I wouldn't know the story on that.
Pardon?
I wouldn't know the story behind only 4 days.
Yeah, I know. I've learned in my life that you never say you're not going to do something because you always do. You always do. Can you hear me okay? Okay. When I did retire, I was looking forward to it. For the last, 2 years prior, I was really anticipating giving it up, going home, doing things I want to do. And when the time actually came, it wasn't quite what I anticipated. So the opportunity was there. I decided, I talked to my wife, and she said, yes, please, go back to work. So that's what I did. I went back, and now I'm Assistant Director of Nursing there, still in major contact with those residents who have dementia, which I enjoy. Thank you for the opportunity to come here. I appreciate that. I think I do better writing than I do speaking. So if I flub up during the whole process, you're going to have to excuse me, okay? Have some grace. Okay, Alzheimer's disease. In a group like this, there's probably the majority who have at least been touched by that disease process. Can I see a show of hands? At least someone you know close to you has been affected by that disease. It's probably the most feared out of all diseases. And why do you think that is? If you consider like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and then you think of Alzheimer's, why do you think that is more feared than any of the other ones? Yes, ma'am. I think you're correct. And I think I can speak for the majority of people. If there's anything you want to avoid in life, it's getting that disease called Alzheimer's disease, because it does. It's a disorder that affects the brain, the functioning, the thinking, your ability to do things. And unfortunately, when that happens, you lose control. And how many of us can think back to the past? I know my grandmother, she was in her early 80s, and this was back in the late 70s and early 80s myself. We noticed that something was wrong. Something wasn't quite right. I'd go to visit, and she'd be sitting on the sofa. Her favorite was the like The Price is Right and those other game shows. She'd be sitting there watching this, and she said, "Oh, Rick, I just got a refrigerator." In her mind, that game show host was giving her the prizes when they were won on TV. And I thought to myself, okay, Grandma, something's not right here. So, but for the most part, she functioned. She could cook. She went to the store. But she had those moments when something was obviously not right. For the longest time, she accused my grandfather of having an affair with a Vietnamese woman up the street. It broke him down. He had a hard time accepting that, and then he would get frustrated. And on February 16th of 1985, my grandfather passed away on my son's first birthday. And my grandmother did not go to his funeral because she still held that in her heart that he was unfaithful. So she did not go to the service. And about 2 months later, my father went to visit her, and she was preparing lunch. She had a can of Campbell's soup poured into a plastic Tupperware dish, and she was going to put it on the stove to heat it. Fortunately, he was there. She went to the hospital, and within about 3 weeks, she passed away. So fortunate for her, she didn't have to live that long in a nursing home. She wouldn't have liked that. But that's how quickly a disease can affect. And back then, Alzheimer's disease was not called Alzheimer's disease. What was it called? Anybody know? I'm sorry?
Dementia?
No, actually it was called senility. My grandmother was senile. I seen that on her paperwork. She was diagnosed as being senile. And when you think of the word senile, that really paints a quite negative picture. And I think over the years, even today, when we have that fear of being diagnosed with some form of dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's Pick's disease, Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's dementia, I think all that fear has been created from way back, the senility. Memories of going into a nursing home and that odor that you had way back then, the picture in your mind, the residents lined up along the nurses' station in wheelchairs, drooling, restrained to their wheelchairs. That's the type of life we're going to look forward to if we have Alzheimer's disease. That's why that fear is real. We have that image. Excuse me. Fortunately for us, during the last decade or so, nursing homes have come a long way. Obviously, if I have a choice, I'm not going to want to go to a nursing home, and I don't think anybody really wants to. But today, nursing homes have come a long way. We're under a lot of regulations. If you work in that field, you think it's really ridiculous, all the regulations you have to abide by. It's cumbersome. And the state comes after you and, fines you, and they give you deficits for not doing something right. But if you look at it, it's done for a good reason. It's done to protect those that live there. So that's what we have to do. We have to look at that and say there's a reason behind it, and we have to support that. Today there's a trend more focused on families keeping their loved ones at home if they're diagnosed with dementia. Today they want to keep them at home for as long as possible. Years ago, when I first started over at Masonic Village back in 2002, we had an early dementia neighborhood, we had a moderate dementia neighborhood, and then we also had an end-stage neighborhood. The early stage was actually early stage. Residents who were admitted there, this is back in 2002, they could still function really well. They could do their own dressing, their bathing, things like that. The moderate stage, they needed a little bit more help. But then the end stage, it was really end stage. They were to the point where they couldn't talk anymore. They needed total care. And they spent a lot of their time in chairs, wheelchairs, Jerry chairs back then. But today, if we have an admission on the earlier dementia neighborhood, they're already into that moderate stage when they come into us. So they've advanced way beyond what we were accustomed to back in 2002. It's admirable if families can keep their loved ones at home. I mean, there's a lot of pluses to it. If you have someone with dementia, any kind of change is very difficult, a change of environment. So if they are able to stay at home with their family, that's a big advantage because they remain in an environment that is very comfortable to them. If you leave your home, just think about it. A person with dementia, they're living with their husband or wife. They're accustomed to just the two of them living in a quiet home setting. You know, they help each other out. At night, they sit down, watch TV, it's quiet. If they move to a nursing home, typically they're going to be thrown into a group, a unit, where there's going to be 35, 45, 50 people. So going from a home where they have two people living to a place where now there's 48 other residents, plus you got your staff, other things going on, it's quite chaotic. So that in itself is a very big trigger for someone with dementia. So if you can keep them at home, more power to you. Go ahead and do that. And today, you know, we're having different programs made available through the Department of Health and the state. They are providing waiver programs. I know we're focusing a lot on trying to do a lot of medical treating at homes instead of going to the hospital. We're going to start transitioning to at-home type hospital settings where we can treat people at home. So why can't we do the same with someone with dementia? Eventually, it's going to get to the point where they're not going to be able to remain at home unless that person is able, maybe they had the resource to hire somebody, you know, to come in 24 hours a day. That's expensive, but some people have those resources. And if you can do that until the very end, that's awesome. You know, you can modify your home a little bit to make ends meet, you know, as far as safety and things like that. But if you don't have that resource available, there comes a point in time when that individual must go to a nursing home. Just some statistics. In 2022, it's estimated that there were about 6.5 million Americans living in the United States, 65 years of age and older, who had Alzheimer's disease. That was in 2022. And it's estimated that by the year 2060, those numbers are going to increase to about 13.8 million. Much of the material we read indicates that women are 1.5 to 2 times more likely to get Alzheimer's than men. And approximately 83,000 people die from Alzheimer's and complications each year. Now, the cost of taking care of someone who has dementia, the average cost in the United States is approximately $321 billion. That's a lot of bucks, really is. So if you think about that aspect alone, keeping your loved one at home, definite pro to that is it's going to be cheaper, okay, for as long as you can do it. I mean, a resident who lives in a nursing home, in a skilled nursing home, memory support, taking into account possibly rehab, medications, and any other type of service they get, the average monthly cost is anywhere from $10,000 to $12,000, $13,000 a month. I talked to some family members who are private pay, and they say, Rick, I can't afford Mom to have therapy. I mean, I'm paying $12,000 a month now. I can't afford that. She doesn't have that money left. Fortunately for Masonic Village, we take care of them. If their money runs out, we take care of them. They stay where they're at. So that doesn't matter to us. But there's some people that really do not, they can't, how should I say, it's one of those things, they want to hang on to that that dollar, obviously to take care of mom and dad. They don't want to let that go. So lots of times it requires us to sit down with them and talk to them and say, hey, don't worry about it. If that's what your mom and dad needs, let's do it. Don't worry. We'll continue to take care of them once that money is gone. There's Medicaid and so forth. But it's difficult. It's a big adjustment for families. It really is. If you've never been there, it's hard to really understand what goes on. Let's see here. Yes, sir.
So I keep seeing news articles about we're on the cusp of finding drugs and treatments and stuff that will prevent or cure or whatever Alzheimer's. Do you have any knowledge of that, or how far away those might be, or how realistic they are?
There's a lot of medications that we use to treat Alzheimer's and the other dementias. I just watched a video last night on the history of Alzheimer's disease, and they're doing so many different studies today, and a lot of the specialists that were on that documentary said that the percentage of these medications that actually do what they think they're going to do, they don't. So the medications itself, they're not effective. A very low percentage will actually be beneficial.
I guess that's now, I'm sort of asking.
In the future? In the future? Well, we haven't heard anything really promising yet, but they're still doing the research. So hopefully they will find something that's going to help.
Second question.
Yeah, and before we go to that one, with some of the medications, one of the things we've found, oftentimes the medications may not improve a person's memory or their cognition overall, but they do treat some of the behavior symptoms. And the reason we know that is it's difficult to tell, right away, but if you begin to decrease that medication or stop the medications, the behaviors begin to resurface. So then we think, okay, that medication was at least addressing some of the behaviors. So there is some benefit there.
And my second question, I don't know if this is Alzheimer's specific, but it's sort of like to keep your mind strong as long as possible is to do things like, word puzzles and numerical puzzles as you, every day, forever. Is that something that's just, does that help with Alzheimer's, or is that more just a keep your brain strong mental exercise? And does it actually help?
Well, there again, the more active you can keep your brain, the better. It's that stagnant period over and over and over again where you're going to begin to lose mass of that hippocampus, which controls the memory. Okay, in that video I watched last evening, they talked about the hippocampus and how you can actually increase the hippocampus. And according to them, you can actually regenerate some of those cells in the brain, in the hippocampus, by continually learning new things, advancing yourself, exercise, diet. So according to them, yes, you can definitely make some positive changes if you do the right thing. And the lady that did the documentary, she was 80, I think 81, and she was worried. She had that gene specific for Alzheimer's, and she was worried that she was going to get Alzheimer's. So she was tested, and she actually had none of the amyloid plaque in her brain at all at 81 years old. And according to the specialist, that's very unusual, because the older you get, the more likely of having that amyloid buildup in your brain. She didn't have any, but she was very active. She did running, jogging, she played tennis. She was very active. She was a news reporter way back in the 50s, and she continued to keep her mind active through research and things like that. So they used that as very much of a support for what they were saying. I saw a hand. Yes, ma'am.
Just a mention about getting tested for the gene. Do you recommend that for people whose parents or other relatives who have Alzheimer's in the past?
Yeah, that's something I think personally you have to decide for yourself. There's two types of Alzheimer's disease. There's early onset before the age of 65, and then there's late onset. Most of what you read supports the fact that early onset is genetic, later onset is not. So you can do that testing and find out if you have that specific gene. But even if you have that gene, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to accumulate that amyloid plaque. So you could have protective genes with that. So you as an individual, do you want to know whether 10 years down the road you're going to have Alzheimer's disease? I don't think I would. I just keep living and see what happens, you know. That's my opinion anyway. But it's everybody's own decision. You know, you can do, like years ago, the only way you could tell if somebody had Alzheimer's disease, Pick's disease, or Lewy body dementia was if they did an autopsy of the brain tissue. Then they could see those specific amyloid plaque buildups, and they could determine that's Alzheimer's disease. Likewise, if they look at that brain tissue and they see those Pick's bodies, those specific bodies related to Pick's disease, he has Pick's disease. Same thing with the Lewy body. They have a specific shape. They can identify it. Now, with Alzheimer's disease, they have a specific PET scan that they can do. They can determine whether or not a person has plaque, the amyloid plaque. They can tell. And there again, do you want to know? No, I really don't. What other questions do you have? Yes, sir.
This is just kind of a side, but I don't know, looking around the room, only a couple of us are old enough maybe to remember the formation of the Elizabethtown Credit Bureau. I will talk to Bob. Mrs. Delaney, that name rings a bell, helped to form the Elizabethtown Credit Bureau. And she had it in her home up on Highland Avenue.
Okay.
In Elizabethtown. Her son graduated in 1958. I graduated in 1958. We were good friends. I just got a notification late yesterday that he passed away. And he's had Alzheimer's for about 6 years. I've been fairly familiar with Alzheimer's because of other relatives of my parents.
Sure.
But this kind of hit me especially hard. Maybe it's just because I see myself class of 58, another one that hit the desk, but kind of thing. But
Yeah.
What for his wife's situation, one of the last, and she did a great job of keeping him at home, like we talked.
Right.
But obviously it becomes increasingly more difficult.
It definitely does.
One of the last things that happened was that she heard a noise, she woke up, and the name was Tim. She couldn't find him. And she had locked the doors and everything, but he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
She hunted around the neighborhood and down in a certain part of the neighborhood, I'm not familiar with where it was, he was actively involved in taking down the neighbor's Christmas tree lights.
Mm-hmm.
Which seems pretty bizarre. There was no connection with them, with these people, with neighbors. What was transpiring in his...
Well, in his mind, that was a job that needed to be done, and he was willing to do it the way he was thinking. Yeah.
Anybody that might have been familiar with Mrs. Delaney or Tim, he just passed away yesterday.
Yeah, the older we become, the more aware we are of the risks of getting Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is the most common form of brain disorder that leads to dementia. Probably the second most common would be the vascular dementia related to strokes, mini strokes. Then we got like Lewy body dementia, Pick's disease, Parkinson's disease. Not quite as common. Pick's disease is less common than the other ones. They usually strike earlier in age, possibly around the late 40s, early 50s. The prognosis is not good. Lifespan is much shorter. Alzheimer's, what's different with Alzheimer's is a very slow, progressive type brain dysfunction. It starts mild. You begin to see some mild symptoms indicating that something may be wrong, and then it takes a while. From diagnosis with Alzheimer's, it's the average of maybe 12, 13, 14 years to end of life. Pick's disease, it's anywhere, once you're diagnosed, you're looking at 10, maybe less than 10 years. Your other types of brain disorders, it varies. A lot depends on any kind of other comorbidities that the individual has. And obviously with dementia, as it progresses, your increased risk of aspirating with eating and things like that. So dementia, either way you look at it, it's quite devastating. It really is. Yes, ma'am.
So we just had COVID a couple of years ago. Have you seen in your facility a decrease because of isolating the patient or the residents? Did you see an increase in their dementia getting worse with the isolation and COVID?
Yeah, for the most part, we were very fortunate. We had a lot of volunteers campus-wide that would come in and help with serving meals. We were trying to keep residents in their room. However, on a memory support neighborhood, Mary, please stay in your room because you got COVID. And you walk away and 5 minutes later, she's out walking around. You can't contain them. So those that are in wheelchairs that you could leave in their room, they may be at risk for falling. So really, it was so unrealistic to expect us to keep them in their room. So they had to be out and about. But for those other residents who were confined to their room, yeah, they felt more depressed. I mean, the families couldn't come in. So we set up video calls and we set up visiting centers with plexiglass, you know. We know now today that plexiglass really didn't do much, but we made it possible for families to connect. Because that was a long span, being separated from loved ones. It really was. Sir, you had your hand up?
I have a wife that has dementia.
Okay.
And she has a babysitter right now. But we noticed that she was taking one of the advertised pills that did the job. She wasn't taking it regularly. And we found that if she takes it on a daily basis, we stop a lot of the daddy visits, you know, past. That, I don't know if it's in our mind or whether it's actually helping. It seems to be.
Yeah, and please understand when I said the benefits are often very low, there are some individuals where the medication will benefit. I personally experienced one incident. When I worked up at Osteopathic in Harrisburg, I worked on a subacute unit, so most of the patients that came in were elderly. We had this one elderly gentleman who was quite demented, and he came in, he was yelling and carrying on. They put him on Aricept, and no lie, the next day he was totally different. And I think that was the first and last time I've ever seen such a drastic improvement in a person with dementia. So there are cases when it will help, other cases not so much. I think what's important for individuals with dementia, especially living at home, you have to learn how to provide a structured environment for them to live in. You have to provide them with activities to do. Obviously, you have to watch over them for their safety. There's so many things I could include, how to prepare, to take care of a loved one at home. There's so much involved. That's why I said it's so painstakingly draining, physically and emotionally, to be committed to that type of care. Earlier stages, it's very workable. But as it progresses, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to do much good for your spouse. And it gets to the point where you have to move on and search for other alternatives. Yes, sir.
That's why I'm interested. I'd like to find out where is the stage that you should have your spouse. In my case, we are on campus right now in an apartment. And I'm trying, she had a hard time adjusting to downsizing, but now she seems to accept it. But we're trying to just keep her there as long as possible.
Yeah, and it's there again. Everybody's different. I use like those three simple stages: early, moderate, and late stage. Those 3 stages. Once a person gets into the moderate stage, then things begin to happen. The moderate stage is the longest stage usually, but in that stage, they begin to lose abilities. They begin to lose that awareness of safety. Different behaviors begin to pop up. So every individual has to be looked at independently, and you're going to have to make the decision. If it gets to the point where if you go to bed at night and she wakes up and walks out, then you can no longer keep her safe. So you need to decide the next step. The next logical step would be to get some help. Either somebody to sit with her while you're sleeping or get some inpatient care. I had that difficult discussion with my neighbor. He was way beyond the moderate stages, and she could not get herself to put him in a nursing home. And I tried to educate her as much as I could, but I was also realistic, knowing that they were married for like 70 years, and for her to put him in a nursing home was going to be devastating. She couldn't do it. She couldn't do it. I said, well, at least put locks on your doors. Get a shut-off switch for your stove. Make sure the basement door is closed and locked so he can't stumble down there. And one afternoon, he managed to get out in the garage. He opened the door and he wandered away. We found him. He wasn't hurt. That was the thing that keyed her. Rick, I need to put him in a nursing home. And we finally worked with her, and he was placed. She's content. She's happy. She knows he's where he needs to be. Yes, sir.
When my mom was in a moderate to late moderate stage, and when my favorite aunt was in a moderate to late moderate stage. And as a pastor for many years, when I visited people at the home or in the hospital, who were, again, in a moderate stage where they could have a conversation, I had very meaningful and sometimes hilarious conversations. Because how are you, and what's happening, or something simple, and they would start talking. Wherever they started the conversation, I would pick up and follow that conversation. Oh, that was exciting, I bet, or something. If they saw a caterpillar on the wall, I'd say, oh, what color is it? And they would tell me the color. Oh, how is that color for you? Because I learned that if it was black, that meant something. There was still something there that was symbolic in their conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was yellow. Well, yellow, I would smile. They would say, yeah, it was a good color. And that's an example of following the lead and going where they're going. And so many, I could use double entendre. And they would get it. And they would laugh. They would get a joke. And we just build on that. And we'd create our own story together. And it was just delightful.
It's fascinating. It really is. That's why, I fell in love with dementia. Not that I want to get it, but I fell in love with the personalities that I met over the years. They're very special. They maintain their personalities. Yes, sir.
You want to tell us a bit about your books that you've written and how festival they are.
Oh, sure. Thank you. 2 books I wrote. I have the flyers on the table. They're available on Amazon. I just recently lowered the prices, so they're a little cheaper. And feel free. There's a good resource if you know someone. Okay. All right. I think that's it. Thank you for your attention, the questions. I appreciated that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, thank you.